Are you looking for a personalized nutrition plan without counting strict macros? My fall masterclass is here. Doors close on Monday, September 8th, and this masterclass is where you can develop a personal plan for your caloric needs, your genetics, your goals, and your preferences without counting macros and without having to give up the foods you love. That's what makes it sustainable. Here's Renee.
I had done macros with a coach, strict macros, and it was unsustainable. I was miserable. I was absolutely miserable. I was so burnt out with tracking. This I can do on a daily basis. It's easy and it's sustainable, and I can do it no matter where I am. I'm down 50 pounds. It's slow, it's steady. I just had a CAT scan, and my fatty liver is pretty much dissipated. It's amazing that it clicked for me, and I'm glad it clicked for me because it's something that I can do forever.
At the same time, I also run the coach's version of the masterclass where you learn how to coach your clients to their personalized plan. It's a framework that's adaptable for people that are just starting out with nutrition to fueling high-level performance. Here's Coach Meg from the last cohort.
I just really appreciate her approach. Okay, what do studies actually tell us? What do we actually have evidence to say works and doesn't work? And then also dialing it back to the things that actually work for people in real life. So I know that there are many people who they'll track macros, or people want to try things like keto or whatever, but like you just can't do that forever. And I don't think it's reasonable to expect people to. And so I really appreciate that she's built this structure that gets people the results they're looking for, can absolutely fuel high level performance if you want it to, but also is like, it works for real life. Like you can still go have a beer with your friends. You can still go eat pizza and achieve those goals.
To register, head on over to optimizemenutrition.com/masterclass or optimizemenutrition.com/masterclasscoaches, one word. Doors close on Monday, September 8th. And it's the last masterclass of the year. If you're ready to be in the top 1% with your nutrition plan, this masterclass is for you. We ditch the junk science, it's evidence-based and sustainable. The links are also in the show notes, and the coach's course has CEUs available for ACE, ACSM, NASM, AFA, CrossFit, and NSCA. Let's get into the show.
Hello and welcome to the Consistency Project podcast. I'm Patrick Cummings, here as always with E.C. Sinkowski. Every week we simplify the principles and practices of nutrition, health, and fitness that will help you perform better, feel better, and live better. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. Hello, E.C. How are you?
Great. How are you doing?
I'm wonderful. I'm wonderful. We're going to talk about something that I know nothing about, which is basically every other week at this point. But we're going to talk about peptides and the peptide craze that is taking over the wellness world, apparently. I didn't know anything about it, so I'm excited to learn about this. A couple things we're going to talk about. We're going to explore what peptides actually are and how they function in the human body. We'll examine specific popular peptides like BPC 157 and TB 500, analyzing their claimed benefits versus actual evidence. And then we're going to talk about the real risks and concerns of using injectable peptides without sufficient clinical research. Does that sound good?
Let's do it.
All right, so let's educate me and anybody else out there who obviously have heard the word peptides, but have no idea what we're talking about here. So let's do a little bit of background. What are they? What are they supposed to do? Why we're talking about them?
Another new wellness trend out there.
I can't keep
Jill,
up. I think that's what's going on.
Yeah, here we go. Another new wellness trend. One of our listeners, Jill, asked about them. So here we have a podcast episode to address another one of these trends. And I think it's just going to be another one of these cases where the marketing hype is really kind of preceding any clinical evidence. I think we've talked about that a lot with supplementing. I mean, gosh, we've probably talked about that a lot with everything.
Yep.
I think capitalism has some good things about it, but that one of the downsides is that everything revolves around selling. Everything becomes a market. You know, selling and attention is where our focus is, not necessarily accuracy or evidence. And so from what I can tell, you know, the peptide marketing is really around anti-aging, healing, tissue repair, recovery, and then of course just anti-inflammatory, because that's just a great sort of meaningless catch-all for these wellness gimmicks. And what peptides are, they're just small protein-like molecules. So we've talked about before that proteins are made up of these individual molecules called amino acids, and proteins are really long chains of amino acids, say more than 100, but peptides are going to just be shorter chains, say less than 100. And our body makes thousands of peptides. A well-known one is insulin. So insulin is a 51 amino acid long peptide hormone, and of course that helps control blood sugar and store nutrients, as we've talked about before. And then even something like the GLP-1 drugs that are so popular now, those are peptides. So they aren't particularly new, But I do think they're sort of new to the general wellness side of things, the wellness side of the internet. And I think there's a lot of good reasons for why there would be some interest in peptides. First of all, we already have evidence of them being useful, as I've just mentioned, but also our body makes them. So the idea here would be, if we have a deficiency or if we need the body to make more of something, this would be a, quote, natural or safer way to replace that function, because it's something that might exist already in our body, and potentially our body could break it down quite easily. So that's sort of the assumption and the appeal to them. And I totally am on board with that stuff. I think it's a really great area to be researching in, but we don't want to assume things are safe, and we don't want to assume things are going to work. We actually really want to test them. And so definitely the injectable peptides are missing some of that evidence. We have had peptides in other formats. Collagen powder, for example, that's collagen peptides. You'll also find peptides in cosmetic stuff like creams. But this injectable one is definitely new and of interest, and it's certainly different than taking them orally, because if you were to take them orally, they were just going to be broken down in the GI tract by our digestive system, where injecting them is supposedly maybe going to enhance the action, because now you have the molecule in the format that your body might use it as. But yeah, I think we're going to get into it. I don't think we've got the evidence to say that it is doing what we hope it's doing.
Got it. Okay, so I teased this at the top. There are a couple that you wanted to break down or talk through. So we're going to talk about BPC 157, TB 500, and a third one, which you said technically isn't a peptide, but you wanted to lump it into this, which is NAD, N-A-D. I don't know if it's NAD. Cool. So let's start with that first one. BP 157. What do we know about it? What's it supposed to do? And of course, as you're alluding to, what's the evidence that people are using to actually say we should use this?
Yeah, BPC 157, definitely the one that I've heard the most about before even looking into this. And BPC, it stands for Body Protection Compound, and then, of course, the numerical identifier 157. But gosh, what a great name for marketing, Body Protection Compound. It is a peptide that's naturally found in our gastric juice, in the stomach, in the human body. So that's where I think it's so easy to make the leap. Oh, it's perfectly safe. It already exists, in the human body. And I searched BPC 157 on Instagram just to sort of see what people were saying about it. And lo and behold, the first video to come up was one from Gary Brecka, who we actually just talked about in a recent Q&A episode. And I think the first rule of thumb for staying away from junk science is to ignore Gary Brecka. So that was perfect that he was at the top of the list there. And he claims that BPC 157 speeds up healing, reduces inflammation, and builds muscle. And then another clip, I saw Huberin talking about BPC 157 for his back pain, which, to his credit, he mentioned that it could have been the placebo effect that he saw improvement in his pain. But so that's sort of what they're saying about it online. And so I went to PubMed. What does PubMed say with human clinical data about BPC 157? Not much. I found a total of 2 studies. The first one injected 2 people. That's right, a total of 2 people with BPC 157 over the course of 2 days. Not very long. They took their blood work and their vitals and basically reported that they didn't die, right? Like, it was tolerated. They had no obvious side effects. And that was reported just this year. It's by Lee in the show notes. But we're talking 2 people, 2 days, not much. I would like to point out as well with that study, it wasn't to say like they had a decrease in pain. It wasn't to measure tissue repair. It was literally, we gave them this shot and they are still okay. The other one was by the same lead author, actually was a few years ago now, from 2021. And it's called a retrospective study, meaning they're looking back. And they had 16 patients who were injected by BPC 157, and they called them 6 to 12 months after the shot. And they said, how's your knee pain now? The problem with this kind of study is there wasn't any standardized test. So at the time of the injection, they didn't get a rating of their pain, for example. At the time of the injection, they didn't get a sense of, can you squat to a certain depth? What's your range of motion? At the time of the injection, they didn't ask about their quality of life and measure it in any sort of way that we use in these types of studies. And then, so of course, that's not replicated again at the 6 to 12 months either. It was literally calling them up and saying, how's your knee pain? We also don't know in that 6 to 12 months what else they might have done besides that injection. Did they change their diet? Did they lose some weight? Are they doing more strength training exercise? Are they taking more supplements? Maybe they're just resting. And also with this type of study, we didn't have a control group because maybe the knee pain just got better with time, which is definitely very possible. So there's so many limitations there with this type of study. Now, what did they find? Of these 16 patients, 12 who had received BPC 157 only, the other ones had received kind of a mixture of peptides, BPC 157 only. In this group of the 12, 11 of the 12, so 92% almost, had significant improvement in knee pain, where one had no improvement. And so that's certainly something that marketers are going to love, right? Oh my gosh, 92% of people have less knee pain. But we really can't kind of use this evidence to say that or to market it and to claim that. It really wasn't studying this in any sort of robust way. Now, there is more research besides those two studies I just mentioned with BPC 157 in mice, rabbits, rats, and dogs. Now, we aren't any of those, so we're not going to assume that our outcomes will be the same. I think it was in the longevity podcast we did a while back. There's some interesting stat. It's something like 50% of the results that we see in animals go on to be what we see in humans. So this is where it's kind of a flip of a coin, that if something happens in a rabbit, we don't know. We don't know if it's going to be the same for us. We definitely don't want to extrapolate research from there. So, when people say there's lots of evidence out there, or, studies show about BPC 157, I mean, sure, I could have missed something for sure. Send it my way if I haven't. But from what I see, we really don't have any true clinical evidence to suggest that this is helping with tissue repair in humans, helping with knee pain repair in humans, to be in any sort of therapeutic or prescriptive way. And I would argue I have more clinical evidence with my 2 pilot 800-gram challenge studies than, BPC 157 has in humans.
Right. Let's go back just for a second. You'd mentioned Huberman, the potential that perhaps that's placebo. Can you maybe double click on that and talk to us about the placebo effect, and maybe if you think that that's playing a role here?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I do want to be open to the fact, before I get into the placebo effect, that there is, of course, the chance BPC 157 is working how they want it to work, which is definitely a possibility. I mean, insulin and GLP-1 drugs, as a reminder, are peptides and incredible drugs. And so I really want to be clear that I'm all for the research into this stuff, because they can be so potent and powerful. It's just that we're not quite at that stage yet for BPC 157. So there is the chance that it truly was a healing effect. But I do want to bring up that placebo effect, because you have to know that the placebo effect from an injection is going to be so much more potent and powerful than just taking an oral supplement, right? Just think about that, right? Like if you go get an injection, just mentally, you're already more believing that this is going to be powerful, just like our association with shots just in generally, right? Now, here's what's really interesting. There's actually a study on this. This is the Privitali study in the show notes. It's a meta-analysis combining results from 50 different studies of more than 4,000 patients of the placebo effect of knee injections. So a pretty good amount of data on just literally injecting the knee. And the majority of people, 52%, responded to the placebo injection with clinically significant improvement in things like pain and stiffness and functions at 6 months out. So we have way more evidence at this point to say that's placebo effect that's actually doing anything. And look, I mean, I think I've said this multiple times. I had back pain for years and years and years. A placebo effect is worth it when you're ending somebody's pain. But that doesn't mean that I can recommend it from a scientific point of view and just say everybody should go do this and cross their fingers in hopes for the placebo effect, especially when there are risks to consider. So worth the research. I think we should continue to look into this, but we're certainly not there yet that we have the evidence that it's really doing anything healing.
You just mentioned there are risks to consider. Do you want to maybe talk about what those are now?
Yeah, I mean, it's really wild to me how readily people are just injecting themselves with substances that have no real clinical research. Because there are risks. I mean, certainly, hopefully all of our audience is just yelling into their phones or around their phones listening to this, like, dose, what about dose? Maybe just dosing ourselves with a compound that we don't really know much about isn't safe. And I like coming back to the concept of insulin just because we know so much about it. But if people who have regular insulin levels, regular insulin production, take insulin, just sort of start injecting themselves with that peptide, they could die. It's too much insulin for what they need. And so we don't know the appropriate dose of various peptides to be taking. There's also the potential that there's just huge variation in the various companies that you're going to for these peptides of what dose you're actually getting. Because again, this hasn't been regulated to show, okay, you need it in this amount to fix knee pain, or you need it in this amount to fix tissue repair. We don't have any of that. So you're just kind of going based on what the company wants to put in the bottle. And again, because there's a lack of regulation, just like supplements, there's a very good chance that what they say is in the bottle isn't exactly what's in the bottle. So we're going to have this big issue with, we really don't have a good sense of what's a safe dose and what could potentially be a therapeutic dose. We also want to be concerned. We don't really know about potentially negative effects of this. For example, these peptides are being advertised for like growth and repair and recovery. Well, what about a peptide like HGH, human growth hormone? Like, why don't people who are just interested in general wellness take HGH? Now, some competitive bodybuilders do, but there's a huge number of risks associated with taking kind of just peptides unchecked. And one of the risks about HGH is potentially a cancer risk because it's enhancing more growth. And so more growth could be things like angiogenesis, where it's creating more blood vessels. And that's really crucial for kind of promoting existing cancer and tumor growth. So it's just one of these things that we don't want to just be like, oh, yes, I want more growth and recovery. You don't really know what pathways you're encouraging to grow, because it could be things that you don't want to grow. Certainly there's going to be cases, just like for HGH, where it might be prescribed if the person has a deficiency. But again, for an otherwise healthy person, we don't want to just swing to the other end and assume it's going to be fine. There also can just be adverse reactions. This could literally be from the needle injection site, which is relatively minor, but it could be more systemic. We could have an immune system response to what we are injecting, potentially because the format that what the peptide is in is not exactly identical to the body, and so the immune system might recognize it as something different. Or even if it is exactly identical to what's in the body, we could have an autoimmune response where the immune system just starts attacking our own body tissues and compounds. And so this is why, one of the many reasons why we go through these clinical trials in humans. Oh, there could also be contamination, because again, these different companies are making their own mixture. So maybe there's some compounds in there that you don't want to be injecting. So, but this is why we do all the clinical trials on humans. We want to have multiple rounds done. We want to have tested on thousands of people. We want to make sure that there's the oversight of the government to make sure that there's liability for the companies and what we think we're getting in the vials are actually in the vials. And so this was all summarized quite nicely by a literature review that came out literally earlier this year on BPC 157 by Joe Zwiak in the show notes. Quote, "It has not been approved for use in standard medicine by the FDA and other global regulatory authorities due to the absence of sufficient and comprehensive clinical studies confirming its health benefit in humans." End quote. And so again, I know we've touched on this before, but there's just this big disconnect for people in compounds marketed as drugs approved by the government, where there's this sort of intrinsic fear, if you will, versus companies marketing cutting edge wellness, where I feel like there's this intrinsic trust.
Yeah.
And, no matter your level of trust in the government, which I know has some variation of opinions, at least if it's been approved by the government, it's been tested by thousands of people in randomized control trials, not 16 people with no control group, no randomization, and no measurement, no standard measurement of improvement. And so I just like to keep reminding people that, you might have the opinion that the government's out to get you, or the government's just in bed with all the companies and making all of this money. You want to remind yourself that the wellness industry has the same thing. I mean, I was looking up this stuff online. Some of these individual shots are $300 to $400 each. I mean, these wellness cutting edge in quotes, of course, wellness companies are just running all the way to the bank as well.
Interesting. All right. There were two more of these peptides you wanted to touch on, TB500 and NAD. I'm going to assume that they have some of the same problems that we've already broken down with the previous one, but maybe give us a little background on that and talk to us about why you wanted to include them in this conversation.
Yeah, I wanted to include them because I just think they're some of the more popular ones, but I think the evidence that we have for these are even less impressive, if possible, than BPC 157. So TB500 is a synthetic peptide that mimics the action of a naturally occurring peptide, which is interesting right there. It's not exactly the natural peptide. So for people that are thinking, okay, I'm getting kind of this natural product already right there, it's kind of broken with TB500. It's claimed to enhance tissue repair, muscle growth, and wound healing. So a little bit similar, I think, to BPC 157. And yeah, there have been some studies done in animals, but I can find no studies with human using TB500. So not super encouraging there. And again, I think great, do more research with it, see what we can find, and maybe we can actually help tissue repair and healing in humans, but not at the level to make any sort of recommendation at all for people, let alone just start injecting it. And an NAD is interesting. I don't know how it's being lumped into this peptide craze. It's got a different chemical structure than a peptide, so it's not a peptide. So it's sort of amazing that it's just like, oh yeah, I'm doing peptides and NAD plus. And it's like, what? How did this get lumped in here? Just sort of shows the power of the marketing, that they'll just tell you what they want to tell you, and you might not be getting the full story. But it's just a molecule that's essential in energy generation in every cell in the body. So if something's involved in energy generation, you can hopefully understand how they can make the leap to these claims of like increased energy and stamina and anti-aging and improved cognitive function. I mean, you're just maybe getting more energy, but you could really say that about vitamin B6. I mean, heck, you could say that about carbs. So this is where marketing just sort of names regular functions in the body and then makes it sound kind of exclusive to their product. Now, there is some data that suggests this molecule NAD that's involved in energy generation declines with age. And so, of course, this is what the marketers are really leaning into, that, okay, we're losing it as we age, and so we need to improve our concentration in the body, and therefore we're going to have this anti-aging effect and improve cognitive function. But of course, we're back to the fact that the studies really aren't comprehensive. They're just kind of doing them in an uncontrolled way and looking at, what's the levels, let's say, of somebody's NAD in the brain at 60 versus another group of people in their 40s and saying, okay, it's different. That's not enough to say that, it definitively goes down with age. We definitely need to do more controlled trials. There could be lots of reasons for the disparity, maybe just a difference in diet and lifestyle. And there have been some, I would say, very early indications, some positive effects with oral supplementation of NAD in some specific neurodegenerative diseases like Parkinson's. So that's very cool and promising. But again, things like dose and true clinical evidence with randomized controlled trials needs to be done before making any recommendations. And this is, again, a further step away from injections, which I really can't find any studies that have been done with NAD injections for these outcomes. Oh, and you know what else increases levels of NAD? Strength training, which 70% plus of the population is not doing at least 2 times a week. So to me, it's like, okay, let's come back to the basics that have all of these far-reaching effects that might also improve something like NAD without taking an injection that hasn't really been tested.
All right. Maybe as we close out this conversation, this episode, maybe just some high-level thoughts on peptides in general, or why this is a trend, or what we should think about it as a trend, not necessarily as a peptide itself, but just big picture.
I think one of the things that I see a lot or hear a lot from my clients or people on social media is they'll send me something and it's like, I've been hearing so much about peptides. I remember this when collagen really started becoming big. I've been hearing so much about collagen. I think a couple things for people to remember when you're, quote, hearing so much about XYZ. One is just the algorithm. As soon as you interact with a post, you're going to get more of that subject. It doesn't mean that that subject is right. It doesn't mean
or even really that popular.
Yeah, it's not popular. You could be stumbling into this small random section of the internet and it just seems so popular because you interacted with a post. I mean, I learned this as soon as I got a dog. You interact with one dog post, you are now getting slammed with dog content, right? So it's very easy to be like, oh my gosh, I'm missing out on all of this stuff, when really the algorithm is just going to feed you anything you interact with. The second thing, of course, is follow the money. I mean, peptides aren't supplements, but when I was looking through it, it was sort of just reminding me so much of the supplement market. In the US alone, it's like a $63 billion a year market for supplements, and they've got $900 million a year of marketing. Of course, you're going to hear about collagen peptides. A lot of money is spent so that you do hear about collagen peptides and hopefully click on something so that they can keep drawing your attention. Marketing is really powerful. And look, I market too. I sell a product, but I think really you want to, in terms of following the money, you want to be really weary of how are these people drawing their money, and is it from something, quote, cutting edge? Cutting edge, you want to translate to unproven or junk science. It means I've got an idea that hasn't been tested yet. And so that's what I kept kind of thinking about with these kind of, I've been hearing a lot about. It's one, what is the algorithm feeding you?
Yep.
And two, are you just falling into kind of, quote, cutting edge, trendy stuff, which really doesn't have any evidence behind it?
Yeah. Those are great reminders. So thank you. Thank you, everybody out there, for listening. Thanks for your ratings and your reviews. Share the show with a friend who you think might like it. We always love seeing that, and we appreciate it when you do. EC and I will be back next week for a brand new episode of the Consistency Project podcast.
Thanks so much for tuning into the show today. Registration for my fall cohort of my masterclass is open, and there's an individuals and coaches version. So head on over to optimizemenutrition.com/masterclass if it's for you, or optimizemenutrition.com/masterclasscoaches if you are a coach to register. The links are in the show notes, and doors close Monday, September 8th. The next masterclass is until next year. This masterclass is for people who want a personalized nutrition plan without having to count strict macros and without having to give up the foods you love. That makes it doable and sustainable. Here's Danielle.
I don't think I realized how easy it was to implement immediately and see instantaneous results. It was incredible what happened over the course of the 10 weeks. It's a complete shift of how you view nutrition. Immediately, I just felt a lot less hunger, and then weight just started dropping, and there's still plenty of wiggle room to have fun. Empowering, I think, is the single word I keep coming back to.
There are two main differences between the content I put out on the podcast and taking this masterclass. The first is we use a progression so that you can go step by step and build up to this plan. You don't start with everything on day one. Here's Coach Morgan.
I think it's really valid to feel like, well, they're giving us so much great content in this podcast. What more could I possibly learn from the masterclass? However, the podcast just by nature can't really follow a progression. They're ongoing, and the course follows a progression that not only is so important for us to go through as individuals with our own nutrition, but it's critical for our clients to go through a progression. So I think that's the biggest and most important difference.
Second, it's personalized. It's personal to you, which I can't do with this podcast or on social media. I'm there answering questions every single day and going live each week so that you develop a plan that really works for you. Here's Renee.
It was just amazing. She's answering questions daily, but then she had live calls every single week where we could ask questions in real time. And that was just very helpful and very eye-opening in a lot of ways. She's very much involved with answering everybody's questions, comments. But you also get the benefit of everybody else going through the class, going through the same things you're going through. And it was just so much more fulfilling. She cared about each person's development at their level so that they could get it. And I've never had anyone do that before.
The community is a great aspect of this course. It's not too big for you to get help that you need at the same time you can learn from each other. And we all do it in concert with my new app that's specifically designed for the way that I teach nutrition. Here's Florian.
I was kind of at a point where I was like, okay, this is like the last thing I'm going to try. You know, I've read so much, I've heard so much. I was kind of, how different can it be? But I think like the drip feeding and how it's all organized, I found it super useful. I think the community really surprised me, like doing this with more people. I find that incredibly motivating. I think for me, it was really the content, the coaching, the community, and then the app that was thoughtfully designed. It totally exceeded my expectations.
And all of this is the same for the coaches version, but then we also dive into coaching topics so that you can make big transformational change with your clients. Here's Frank.
I've done quite a few nutrition courses over the years, and I was thinking, do I really need to do another one? But really what was the case was I needed to do this one. This one would have saved me a lot of time over the years. But it's the sheer practicality of the advice that you're getting. Every single thing I learned, I know I can translate that into my day-to-day coaching. That's rarely been the case before.
The coaches version is a prerequisite to become an affiliated 3 Pillars Method coach and use my method to teach others. But you can also get CEUs for organizations like ACE, ACSM, CrossFit, NASM, AFA, and NSCA. So check out optimizemenutrition.com/masterclass if it's for you, or /masterclass coaches if you're a coach. The links are in the show notes, and doors close Monday, September 8th. If you have any questions about whether the course is a good fit for you, don't hesitate to email me at info@optimizemeenutrition.com or reach out to me on social media. I'm really looking forward to working with you.